as always, I'm going to record the sessions. I just started recording now. So welcome to you all. I'm going to start with some feedback. Maybe now not going to spend quite as long as I would have spent on this because of the delay, but I realize I've not actually formally gone through any of the feedback that you've been leaving on the instant feedback page, but I thought it would be useful to just go through it. So some positive things that people have said in the recent weeks. So people seem to be liking the format of the class on the website. People have said that. It's taken a couple of examples here of some of the positive things that have been left. So thank you for that. I will just keep using and trying to build on the website if you're liking it. People are saying that the fact you're interacting on the whiteboard is a good thing. So I don't know obviously what other classes are like or how other formats are working, but this seems to be working well in this class and people seem to be responding well to it. So I'm going to keep using that format. And someone also made a point of talking about the podcast and saying that they liked the podcast for the tutorial 1. So that's good. It's not something you're going to get every time, I'm afraid. I've been trying to develop the materials, and the podcast is something I did quite recently, and I'm going to try and do some podcasty type stuff for later in the semester, but it won't be there all the time, I'm afraid, just slightly limited with time and the materials that I've put together already. However, anything that I do from now on, I'll try and use podcasts where appropriate, because that seems to have gone down well. Some feedback about the coursework. So people saying it was useful to spend some time on the coursework. So one person had asked about the marks for the examples. They're asking what exact grade the examples got. The only thing that I'm going to say on that is that I don't think it's helpful to you to give you exact marks. The reason for that is that giving you indication that they got an A means that they belong to the top standard. They were both very good passes. The reason I don't want to give you specifics is because I don't then want you to be reading examples and scrutinizing, going, is this why this got more than that one, or is this better, or is that better? Because the examples are there to give you guidance, but they're not there to be used as templates. And I'm conscious that I don't want to give you so much specific guidance in terms of the way the examples are laid out that you don't follow what's best for you in your work. So I'm stopping short of giving out the actual marks because I think knowing that they got the top possible grade is enough. And I don't want people to be kind of second guessing as to what was the reason for this or that. Just know that they're good examples, and then I want you to follow your own instincts in your own direction. Some people have asked me about word count and things. So I have responded to a couple of emails about word count and what's expected. Just to be very quick, the section 1 should have the bulk of the word count that you're using. And when I say should, that doesn't mean that you're going to get marked down if it doesn't, but you should think of your coursework and section 1 a bit like laying the foundations for section 2. So if you do a good job of section 1, then section 2, some of the groundwork for section 2 will already have been done. So you should expect to have the balance, more words in section 1 and then slightly fewer words in section 2. But there isn't a hard and fast rule, and I won't be marking up or down depending on just because of words. I'll be marking you on the basis of what you say. Someone else is saying a bit daunting looking examples and giving the thought of plagiarism. I mean, all I can say is that you, as long as you're doing your own reading and making sense of the material on your own, you shouldn't be risking falling foul of plagiarism. And there are going to be drop-ins, as I'm about to talk about. There are going to be opportunities for you to make sure that that's not the case. I should say I've also now opened up the submission portal on Vision, so you can practice. You can now put your draft through the practice portal to see what your similarity score and things is. So shouldn't be a problem, but if you are anxious or want to check anything, you always feel free to get in touch with me. Someone had asked if it would be possible to put the lecture slides link at the top of each page near the essential reading. So I tried to do that for this week, and maybe let me know in the chat. But is it confusing at all having a lecture prep page and then a live session page? I was never sure of that when I was putting the site together, but certainly for this week and then for the forthcoming weeks, what I'll do is I'll put the link to the slides. I keep cutting out, do I? Am I cutting out for everybody? Okay, Carmel, it looks as though it might just be your connection. Maybe try drop out and drop back in. Yeah, so I'm putting the link to the lecture slides at the top of the lecture prep page now as well. So I'll do that from now on, if that's helping people with navigating. Someone's got in touch with feedback saying that the coursework examples weren't opening. They weren't able to actually look at the files. And I'm not sure, they didn't leave their email address or anything. I'm not sure if that's something that's happening for everyone or just this person. I tried to check it as best I can, and it was working for me. So I don't know if anyone else has had that problem, you could let me know. But as far as I can tell, they are working on the site. I'd mentioned before there was going to do drop-ins. So I'm going to be doing drop-ins at the start of week 7 on Monday and Tuesday for sure. But I am aware that the submission deadline is in week 7. And that might feel like a little bit too late for some of you. So I'm very happy to organize drop-ins in week 5 as well. And I wondered how people felt about that. There's no pressure either way, but would having some drop-in time in week 5 suit you? Please let me know. You can just do it in the chat function or whatever. But okay, some pretty rapid affirmative responses. So I will organize to do that then, and I will communicate with you via email, most likely, and we'll get something set up for next week. My time is really rather under pressure. I know that everyone's under pressure at the moment, but with lockdown, both me and my wife are full-time, and we have a young son, so lockdown is really quite a juggling act at the moment. But I will do my best to squeeze in some time, so it won't be kind of long runs of several hours on the trot. It will probably be hours here and there that I can manage in my diary, and I'll send an email out, and you can. There'll be a means of just not noting your name down in a slot. So hopefully that's helpful. Just a quick note, you would have probably received an email from me last week, or sorry, even at the weekend. Just a few things I threw onto the interesting team stuff page. Some stuff that had been shared during tutorials by some of you, so thank you for that. And I came across this, my wife found this recording she had of Bear Grylls, an early talk, and it is really interesting, and he talks about teamwork and his experiences climbing Everest. And I think on the basis of just hearing someone talk about their direct experience of climbing Everest, it gives you a different perspective of what the people in the case are going through. So it maybe gives you a little bit more of an understanding of what they were experiencing, and that in itself will help with thinking about the theories. But he also directly talks about the power of teamwork, which I thought was quite interesting. And also finally, I've put on a mid-semester feedback form on the class site. I do this with all my classes. It's something that gives you the chance to give me feedback, whether it's good or bad or some suggestions, but at this time of the semester, I can actually do something about it. So if you fill in the feedback form, I can action your feedback for the benefit of you, rather than your feedback benefiting next year's class when you do the end of course feedback forms that the university sends out. So it's on a banner. So if you go on the website, you'll see at the top there's a orange banner asking you to fill in the feedback. So please do there's just 3 questions. Take a few minutes to fill that out. It will really help me. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent, some ideas you have, whatever, I'd be delighted to hear from you. So thank you for that in advance. Right, so let's move on to today, and I really am sorry we're 10 minutes late in starting, so I'm going to try and jog through so we can get onto some discussion. So we're talking about teams like psychological safety today, and just as I'm doing every week at this part of the course, recap on the fact that we're working in 3 levels with the case study. We've done the systems level, organizational level, the kind of zoomed out approach, and now we're looking at the group level. So we're looking at team psychological safety in the group level. And that's all we're focusing on. Team psychological safety has got lots of moving parts to it, so it's full of different angles and approaches you could take. And hopefully you've had the chance to read the reading from Professor Amy Edmondson. She's the sort of leading name in psychological safety research, and the essential reading was a book chapter of hers. As I mentioned last week, the book chapter is useful in that in the introductory parts of the book chapter, she actually talks about cognitive biases and systems level. So she sort of mirrors the structure that we're using for this part of the course in the way she introduces team psychological safety. So that's really helpful for us, because it actually puts our discussions into context, but from the perspective of team psychological safety. So please, if you've not done it, have a read. It's about nursing staff and the administering errors of drugs. So how often the wrong drugs are given, and how nursing teams identify and note error when they happen. So this is what she defines team psychological safety as. Team psychological safety is the shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And we're thinking about what kind of interpersonal risks are associated with behaviors like asking for help, admitting error, as is focused on in the essential reading for this week, or just expressing a different point of view. And these are manifested as different kinds of risks that we take as members of a team. So risk of looking ignorant, risk of looking incompetent, risk of being seen as intrusive, or risk of being seen as negative. So we are always weighing up these risks in a team, and team psychological safety diminishes the size of these risks and allow us to gain the benefit of the points. The group gains the benefit of the points we might be wanting to make. Psychological safety is a function of interpersonal trust and mutual respect. So in teams with high psychological safety, members believe that the group will not rebuke, marginalize, or penalize them for speaking up or challenging the prevailing opinion. So this idea of speaking up, and if we feel able to speak up, then we feel safe to ask questions, safe to admit mistakes, safe to express dissent, and they feel safe to ask for help. And asking for help can be one of the hardest things that people do. This is a slight aside, but there was an artist that he kind of went viral during lockdown last year, and he's a kind of illustrator, and he did this illustration that said, "Oh, what's the bravest thing you've ever done?" And the response was, "Ask for help," which is quite powerful. So establishing psychological safety allows these things to happen, and they can seem trivial, but they are in fact some of the magic ingredients of good and effective teamwork. So when people feel safe raising questions, asking for help, admitting mistakes, and expressing dissent, groups are therefore, or when that happens, groups are more likely to make better decisions, and they will learn more effectively as a team. And if you go on and do some of the extra reading from Amy Edmondson that you can find in the reading page of the site, she looks at the relationship between psychological safety and learning among teams. So there's different conditions that affect psychological safety, and some of these we can relate directly to the case. And in the case, there were several of these conditions that were undermining the development of psychological safety for the teams. So we had things like perceived status difference within the teams among different people, with different leadership styles of Hall and Fisher, and we had a lack of familiarity or prior interaction among the team members. And each of these conditions diminished psychological safety and therefore impaired the decision-making effectiveness of the teams. And throughout the case, you'll see examples of negative consequences of a lack of candid discussion among the team members. For instance, nobody questions Fisher concerning the state of his health, and no one questions Hall as to why he's ignoring his own turnaround rule. And with perceived status difference, there's evidence that suggests the clients and the guides perceived certain status differences within the teams, and the perceptions that they had discouraged members of the team asking questions, speaking candidly, or even expressing dissent. And the clients and the guides possessed different levels of status within the teams. And remarkably, a pecking order even emerged among the guides as well, as actually some of you have already pointed out during the tutorials last week. We also saw different leadership styles as well. So we've got some statements here from Rob Hall and John Krakauer, but one of the characteristics of the leadership styles was that unwillingness to entertain challenging questions and let people express concerns. So Rob Hall's quote here, he literally wasn't, he said, "I will not tolerate dissension up there." So he was actively, explicitly discouraging some of the features of psychological safety as is defined by Amy Edmondson. And John Krakauer notices that passivity on the part of the clients had thus been encouraged throughout the expedition. And teams learn that it kind of becomes, they become socialized into a certain way of behaving, and you see that. So there are positive cycles, positive reinforcing cycles among psychologically safe teams where they feel freer to express their thoughts, and there are the opposite. So there are self-perpetuating negative cycles where the team also almost becomes, they learn to be passive, and that makes them much less capable of acting when problems start to arise. So leadership styles of Hall and Fisher diminish the level of psychological safety within the teams as well. And an example of that would be just Hall's general demeanor. I think overall, I think he was a really strong example of how leadership affected the psychological safety in general. We've also got familiarity and prior interaction. So most of the team members met one another for the first time in Nepal. Sorry, just going to read that question that you've just put up there. George, yes, and then he dissented from his own 2 o'clock rule to get Hansen up to the summit. Yeah, exactly, and that's a sort of interaction of, you know, the hypocrisy of having having a rule and choosing to ignore it, and the risk of having developed a culture where no dissension was allowed. So you become a single point of failure. So the Hall became, and this is kind of an example of where you might look to create some integration in your theories in the coursework. So from a systems point of view, Hall created a single point of failure in the system because he would tolerate no dissension. Therefore, it was only his decision making that determined the fortunes of the group. And then at the same time, he chose to ignore his own rule, and you could chalk that up against, you could look to explore what was happening there through cognitive biases, as we'll talk about next week, or indeed you could look at it from the point of view of the role of leadership within psychological safety. So Murray, this is a general example, but what if the learning happened after the team had split, i.e. members didn't speak up whilst working in the team because they didn't feel comfortable speaking up, but were willing to talk after they had left it? Would the learning from that be seen as being less impactful or helpful? It's a good question. So I don't think it would be seen as being less impactful or helpful, but it depends on the team and the context, because in this context, the team had one specific shared objective to achieve, and which was getting to the top of Everest and, of course, getting back down again. And therefore, establishing a level of team psychological safety, awareness of cognitive biases, a well-designed system, all these things would have benefited them in achieving that goal. Having a debrief is a very common feature in good team working. So if they were to have a debrief, then there would absolutely be learning opportunities. And so you should have debriefs. It very much depends on the context of the team. If it's a team that's going to work together again, then I would argue it's essential for a debrief. However, a debrief can be limited in its capacity to help if some of the positive features of good teamwork, like team psychological safety, are missing, if you see what I mean. So if it's already missing, if you don't recognize the fact that it's missing, the way in which a debrief will be conducted will be limited in its scope. So it's an example again of you can say you had a debrief, but if you're in a negative perpetuating cycle, then the debrief might not actually be as helpful as it could be. You see this in public inquiries. Look at Grenfell Tower. The government and public bodies say that they want to learn so that this disaster doesn't happen again, but that word learn can be slightly corrupted in its use. So do they really want to learn, or do they want to signal their willingness to learn because it's the right thing to signal, but they don't actually truly engage with the learning, because to engage with the learning means they have to own up to weaknesses or mistakes, and that's part of the problem. So in your question, Murray, it depends on the extent to which the group is open to learning at the end. But in principle, yes, it's helpful. Yes, it's impactful. And the extent to which it's helpful and impactful depends on context. So most of the members met one another for the first time in Nepal after landing in the country. And then they moved quickly to base camp and began their ascent. So the schedule left little time for the development of relationships among the team members. the familiarity with one another made it difficult for them to develop mutual trust and respect, which is required to in order for them to admit their concerns or their doubts, speak candidly about their own feelings and perceptions, and express dissenting views. And then later, several climbers admitted they had concerns about the experience and skills of their teammates. More experienced clients believed that some teammates did not have the expertise required to ascend. And we can see that in several of the quotes that you can find in the case. But Bukharev said, nobody questioned Fisher's exhausted appearance. John Krakauer, this is their famous team in name only quote, a group of complete strangers, trust in one's partners is a luxury denied to those who sign on as clients on a guided ascent. And then you can see there's a kind of an assumption made in an ascent like this, and it's an assumption on both sides. So if you've got a leader who's very confident and has prior successes behind them, there's an assumption that, well, it doesn't matter who comes in as a client, I'll get them to the top. And you saw that arrogance in the way that Hall in particular operated. And there are other quotes, Fisher talks about a yellow brick road to the top of Everest. Hall, there's a couple of quotes from Hall which are just, there's one that's like, I've got people even more pathetic than you to the top, so don't worry about it. And we'll look more into that in when we look at bias next week, because there's a couple of good examples of bias when we look at Hall's behavior in particular. But there's bias on that side, and there's bias on the side of the clients, because they sort of come into this thing and they've paid the money, and they think, right, well, I paid the money, Hall, Fisher, they're legends, they're brilliant climbers, they're going to get me to the top. And there's almost a hidden agreement on both sides that they just expect that by joining the group, they become a team, but there's no commitment or effort directed towards creating a team for that specific group of people. Hall kind of treats them as just interchangeable. They all just represent client paying money, but there are particular characteristics, and the need to get them to cohere as a team is ignored. So just a couple of quotes here. This is from W. Edward Denning's book, Out of the Crisis, a kind of famous management book. It's got some good, you can pick up a used copy on Amazon for about £3. There's some pretty good nuggets in there. It's a lot of focus on using evidence, in particular statistical evidence, to do management, but there's some good quotes about psychological safety in there. No one can put in their best performance unless they feel secure. Secure derives from se, without, and kure, meaning fear or care. If team leaders act in authoritarian or punitive ways, team members may be reluctant to engage in interpersonal risk involved in learning behaviors such as discussing errors. And that's from Edmondson's work, that last quote there. So this brings us to our discussion question for today. We're just going to cover this one question in today's class. So I think what I'll do, because I'm struggling to get it actually up properly as I would normally, I'm going to paste the question like I do in tutorials into the chat bar, and I'm going to put a whiteboard up. So based on what we've covered, you've done your reading and your prep and what I've briefly covered today in class, I'd like us to start to place on the whiteboard some responses to that question, and we'll see what different people's thoughts are about this. So we're looking at what factors created a climate in which members felt uncomfortable expressing dissent. So this is particularly the expression of concerns, anxieties, issues existing within the team and its hierarchy. Any elements of this that jumped out to you from the case? So let's see, we've got a couple of people posting up now. Did not feel they could question leadership. Hierarchy of guides. Yep. Condescending aura about the leaders. Absolutely. Not a nurturing feeling. Dictatorish leadership. Yeah. And the experience of others didn't want to speak up and sound inexperienced, and that's a very that unites a lot of the other things that have been placed up. You can think. I remember doing a podcast recording with people at graduation a couple of years ago, and one of the graduates said, I said, what advice would you give to your first year self? And she said, if I could give myself advice when I was sitting back in first year lectures, it would be those things that I'm worried about, those things that I'm anxious about, I should probably say them to someone else, because I look back now and I realize everybody had the same anxieties and worries. But when you're in that first year big lecture, you kind of go, oh, I must be stupid. I must not be getting this. And therefore I didn't speak up, and I struggled as a result. And I think that applies. I actually think that applies throughout. I don't think that goes away even when you're in fourth year. But you can see when you're up, you're there to conquer Everest. You're all there, and you've got this implicit sense that you're all relying on each other. However, you don't want to come across as weak, and so there's insecurities there. Unsure of what response they get. Yeah, absolutely. Someone else has mentioned hierarchy. We use a color we've not used just to add to this. The question of hierarchy. If you could put your thoughts in green under that, I'm going to just put some things, grouping them together. Feeling an experience, unfamiliarity, unsure of what response they get. So it's good. We'll come to leadership and things. So put some thoughts about hierarchy in green, like someone's put here, hierarchy not just with guides but with clients as well. So do you think having a hierarchy was unhelpful then? Someone's saying yes. Hall created the expedition to Everest format, so was seen as all-knowing in a way. Yeah, so yeah, he was the inventor of the idea of the guided ascent. Someone saying guides were paid differently, so they didn't feel like they would be listened to. Yes, there's a sort of structural instrumental feature to the hierarchy with the guides as well, so they kind of knew what each other was getting paid, and that put a value on their position in the hierarchy. The hierarchy was unestablished personal beliefs, and that's really good. That relates to the first thing we talked about insecurity, unfamiliarity, and the hierarchy, and that the hierarchy, we see it in the case because Krakow has reflected on it and is creating a narrative around about the whole story in his memoir, and then that's taken by the authors of the case. But the point is that the hierarchy existed individually in each person's head and wasn't necessarily something that was explicit and shared, and that creates further anxiety and lack of security. But it should be horizontal integration, not vertical integration. It was unhelpful as there was less communication. Could have been helpful, but was poorly implemented. So one thing that I've experienced of this in some of my current research is that, so I'm doing some observation research at the moment where it's kind of not been happening because of coronavirus, but I am still in the middle of research where I sit in on panels for investment in businesses. So you've got like six investors, and they are needing to make decisions as a team on who gets money and who doesn't. I mean, it's not quite like Dragon's Den, but just to give you some kind of, you know, handle on what it's like. It's a bit like the idea of Dragon's Den. It's not in front of the businesses. It's on paperwork. But so you've got a group of experts forming a team, and many of them haven't really met or worked together before when they come in the room. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I have sat in on something like 50 or 60 of these now, and they always want to form a hierarchy, and it's not conscious, it's not explicit, and it's something that I know from reading research on it, is that it's quite human nature to establish a hierarchy. So kind of anthropologically, we as a species, we like to establish a hierarchy, but it's not necessarily conducive to good team performance, and that's what I'm seeing in these decision-making panels with investment, is that the hierarchy is really unhelpful, but everybody wants it to establish it, and it's amazing how easily it can be established. It can be established by one person piping up with some kind of grand and self-important comment at the start of the day, and that kind of anchors the room around them. Suddenly everybody's listening to this person, and the amazing thing that you see is that someone anchors themselves as being a dominant force in the room, and sometimes that is established on the basis of something quite useful that is said, or quite noted as being valuable around the table. And then what you see is the person who's established that position of strength, over the course of the day, they make statements that are less and less informed by the fact that they know what they're talking about, and more driven by the fact they know they've got a dominant position in the room, so they can kind of say whatever they want. And it's incredible to watch. But hierarchies are dangerous because if they are established without any kind of strategy or sense of, equity in the room, so I'm talking about in the room or on the side of the mountain, wherever, if you just sort of let it, Charles Darwin style kind of Hunger Games, establish itself without really being discussed and shared openly, it can become quite a corrosive feature for the group, and it can lead them to make poorer decisions and have less effective communication. So this is what we saw on Everest for sure. So that's an example where I've seen it in other environments. Has anybody seen similar things happen in an environment they're experienced with, coursework groups or in your own work? Anybody had an experience of a hierarchy being established and you're kind of going, why are they in charge? Happened a lot in group work for uni, someone's saying. Anybody else? I can tell you another time, some other work that I did previously, some consultancy work when I was involved in. I had to go to H&M headquarters in Stockholm. I had to meet with their head of design, and I was talking to them about their teams in their design, how they design different lines of clothing, and I was asking about authority and hierarchy. And in H&M, they don't, in their sub teams for designing different things, they just don't have any hierarchy. There's no team leader, there's no supervisor. They all work completely flat, and they spend a lot of time getting to know each other as a team, and therefore they just become an effective organism, if you like. It can happen in sports teams. People think because they're more skilled, okay, let me just move this, they should lead. Yeah, this is something, this is the kind of attribution of skill to, or the alignment between a skill in one area as being qualifying criteria for something else, and that can lead to tension within teams if it's not handled in a transparent way. Can there also be dissent among the lower end of the hierarchy, as in the top are dissatisfied with the bottom? Well, when there's a deep hierarchy, what can happen is that the level of trust that exists among the bottom members of the hierarchy is diminished. The more kind of power that is wielded by the people at the top, that's for sure. And you might have to expand on your point if I can help more with it. But certainly there's a relationship between leadership and hierarchy and psychological safety and dissent. That's absolutely the case. So let's just trying to see a couple more of your points, and then I'm going to start a new whiteboard because you've already filled that up. Thanks for your contributions. Happens in workplaces. There's a lot of younger staff. Older staff tend to feel that they are more qualified due to age, not skill. Yes, definitely. And sometimes one of the things that I've noticed as well in that kind of situation is that very often it's expressed in that way, and usually it means something else. So lack of psychological safety, you can see the symptoms of it coming out in the way that, say, for example, if older staff feel that they are more qualified due to age, so the desire to establish a hierarchy is often a symptom of poor psychological safety as well. So the desire to impose a means of establishing a hierarchy, and also if there's poor psychological safety, that tends to also relate to the transparency with which the hierarchy is created. So people who have any kind of power will look to establish a hierarchy on the basis of some kind of opaque measure of the hierarchy. For example, if you're older, then you deserve to be in a greater position of authority, and it's precisely because they feel insecure and threatened that they do that. So it can be something like older members of staff trying to impose some sense of hierarchy, suggesting that because they're older, they're more qualified. That's them trying to capitalize on a feature of their position that is that can't be recreated by the younger members of staff. Therefore, it means that their power and their position in the hierarchy is unchallengeable. So that tends to be a symptom of poor psychological safety. So you can feel sorry for your older colleagues who ever left that quote, because they're probably just feeling threatened by your youth and enthusiasm. I'm sorry, I'm slightly losing track of what everyone has contributed here. If there's anything that I haven't noted that you think is worth pointing out, draw a ring around it or something, and then we're going to clear the board. I see people assume the guide still knew best. Hierarchy based upon experience created insecurities further down the hierarchy. Exactly, and it reinforces insecurities because you feel less confident in your abilities and therefore less qualified or entitled to speak up about issues. Good. And a couple of you mentioned communication. Communication, you'll find, will come up again and again throughout the whole class. But communication is about good and bad. Good communication doesn't mean that everybody's smiling and slapping each other on the back and saying how great life is all the time in an effective team. Good communication is also about being able to express issues, problems, apprehensions about things. And team psychological safety is all about that. It's all about being able to communicate the good and the bad. I'm going to clear the board now. Thank you for those. So just a kind of final thought on that. I'll write this in. So what curbs candid conversation? On the basis of what we've talked about there, we had evident anxiety, insecurity, feelings of inexperience that were plaguing the minds of the individuals. That was one kind of grouping of responses. You had hierarchy and the features of the hierarchy, the fact that it wasn't particularly explicit, and the fact that it was governed by different perspectives on the situation. So for the guides, it was governed by pay. For the climbers, the clients, it was governed by some sort of sense of other people's experience. So the situation didn't allow for downtime once the expedition left base camp. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely true. One of the things that makes me think of as well is talking of downtime, but not just downtime, is the nature of time in the case. You've got this final 18-hour window to get to the summit, and then you had the ups and the downs. I mean, the thing is that they spend a lot of time together over a period of months, basically going up and down. So that there, in theory, there was time for this to happen, but I guess you could say, when should you there wasn't enough downtime, but when should they have tried to establish psychological safety? When would have been an appropriate time, and how would they have done it? So the quote of Hall. Okay, there's one response. Whilst training for the expedition, while they were still at base camp, I guess that clients not being at equal skill level is something that curbs candid conversation. I think that's very true. Atmosphere of judgment rather than collective learning, absolutely. Hall's comment of I will not tolerate any dissension up there, when on the hill my word is law, or whatever. It's probably a slight paraphrase, but he was probably right to say that for the final ascent, right? If you think of like a military operation, soldiers don't really want to they can't call timeout whilst they're coming under enemy fire and think, well, how are we getting on here, guys? Do you think we're doing a good job? You're in absolute operation zone there. But taking the time at the start. So one of the things that you may want to reflect on is psychological safety is something that needs to be cultivated at particular points, particular opportunities for a team. So yeah, so Hall calling no dissent on the final approach is understandable, but he had no dissent beforehand to air out the issues. And that's the thing. I think what you want to reflect on is the dissent isn't appropriate sometimes, but it is appropriate when you're at a planning or strategy formulation stage, and an effective team will recognize that what they need to do is make sure that there's an atmosphere of open communication at a time when they're all getting together on the goal. Remember, we talked about already in tutorials and earlier lectures about how a good team will conform around a goal, and it's important that at that stage there's a candid and open communication so that everybody's views are held and heard. They didn't really progress through the team development stages like Tuckman and Jensen. Yeah, they certainly didn't. They didn't arguably even get to forming, let alone any of the other stages. Excellent point. So you think about, this is one of I'll leave you with this, the kind of paradox of team psychological safety is that it's something that is earned and accumulated and acquired over time. But the time when you really want it to help you is early in the process. So there's this paradox of you need to establish it in order to go ahead forward effectively as a team, but it's going forward ahead effectively as a team that will really establish good team psychological safety. So excellent teams are trying to constantly cycle and build on team psychological safety. Psychological safety is hard earned and incredibly easily lost. But you saw some of the negative consequences of not having even allowed the opportunity for it to be established in the case, and you've raised some of the key points here in response to my question. So well done, thank you for that. So we're going to leave it there. I'm really sorry that we lost a few minutes at the start of today. As I say, Blackboard just was not playing ball for me in the slightest to allow me to load anything up. So please have a look for cognitive biases for next week. There's lecture prep to do on that and some reading from Nobel Prize winners, no less. And I will communicate with you via email to share some drop-in slots that I'll get into the schedule for next week. It might take me a little while to just organize my diary, but I'll just watch out for your emails. I'll be in touch about that. And finally, please fill in mid-semester feedback, which you can access on the class site. You'll see the banner at the top when you land on the class site. Please do take time to fill it in. It will really help me, and hopefully it will benefit you in the latter part of the semester. So thanks for your attention, everybody. Thanks for your contributions today. And I will see you in tutorials. Take care.